I don't think that this video is working, so we're going to use this instead. Okay, everyone. I think I am live on both YouTube and Facebook. Maybe you can just give me a thumbs up if you are able to see me on either site. But I'm hopeful that you can hear me and that you can see me. It says my connection's unstable, but I see a few viewers on Facebook and I see a few viewers on YouTube. I hope you can. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, let's get started. I wanted to speak a little bit about the plagues in Egypt, and what we're currently experiencing here in the world. Plague for what we're experiencing. I'm hearing it all the time. I'm hearing this is the apocalypse, and you know, what is it that we are really experiencing? And that word plague is being thrown back and forth. And so I found an interesting article on time.com that actually said something that I think a lot of us have wondered whether or not the plagues in Egypt, the plagues in the Passover story, were they really caused by God, or could they be some kind of scientific phenomenon? Hi, I see all of you. Thank you for watching. And so possibly, the plagues could have possibly been some kind of scientific phenomenon. One example given in the article was that maybe volcanic ash was responsible for the plagues in Egypt. Maybe wind carried volcanic ash to Egypt, and I'm reading from the article, the toxic acids in volcanic ash would have included this particular mineral that would have caused the river to turn like a blood-like red color. And then the article continues and says all the different reasons why the frogs would jump out of the river, why the insects would come, why the beasts would come, how boils would be caused. And it's pretty interesting. Another theory is that red algae sucked the oxygen out of Egypt's waterways, killing all the fish and turning the water red. And then the article continues, and this is why this happened, and this happened, and this happened. But I think the most interesting part of the article is the following. This is a quote from a Jerusalem-based rabbi, Rabbi Yonatan Nerel, and he says that God was teaching the ancient Egyptians a lesson about justice. When they refused to do the right thing and free the Israelites, they suffered the consequences. But listen to this. There's a Pharaoh within each of us that wants to continue to do something that's not right. And I don't necessarily believe that we're doing something wrong or incorrect. But what I want us to do is turn to the commentators and look at different sources that speak about the plagues with the hopes that maybe we can learn something about humanity. We can't control what's going on outside our walls at the moment. Look at all of humanity and think to ourselves as a collective and as individuals, what can my response be? And so I want to look at plagues number 1 and 2. Let's look at blood and frogs. So because this is live, I don't necessarily have a source sheet. Normally we would be sitting around a table and all reading together, and I wish we could, but instead I'm going to read to you. So this comes from Shemot, and I'll read a little bit for you so that you get a sense of the first plagues. Thus says the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. See, I shall strike the water in the Nile with the rod that is in my hand, and it will be turned into blood. And the fish in the Nile will die. The Nile will stink so that the Egyptians will find it impossible to drink the water of the Nile. And God said to Moses, say to Aaron, take your rod and hold out your arm over the waters of Egypt, its rivers, its canals, its ponds, and its bodies of water, that they may turn to blood, and there shall be blood throughout the land of Egypt, even in the vessels of wood and stone. And Moses and Aaron did just as God commanded. He lifted up the rod and struck the water in the Nile in the sight of Pharaoh, and all the water in the Nile was turned to blood, and the fish in the Nile died. So I found so many interesting commentaries on the various plagues, and I'm just choosing a few. I'm realizing that I can't actually see if you're commenting. Hi, everybody. I just chose a few pieces that I think were incredibly interesting and a few pieces that I hadn't seen before. And so this is a commentator, the Marechet Heidenheim, who was written by Rabbi Tevele Bondi. It was published in 1898, and it's his commentary on the Pesach Haggadah, and in particular, the 10 plagues. And this is what he says about the plague of blood. Listen to this. Why did God bring a plague of blood? It was measure for measure. God said to Abraham, "The nation that you served, I shall judge." Since the Egyptians did not allow the daughters of Israel to immerse themselves in water to be purified from their impurity, so that they could fulfill the commandment of be fruitful and multiply, so God punished them with water. So let me explain this for just a moment. What's happening here is that the idea is that first the Egyptians attacked Bnei Israel, attacked the children of Israel by refusing to let the women go to the mikveh, refusing to let them immerse themselves to ritually purify themselves so that they would be ready to procreate, so that they could fulfill the commandment, be fruitful and multiply. And why I wanted to bring this to your attention is, first of all, I don't believe in a God that punishes measure for measure. I don't believe in that kind of God. I don't believe in a God that looks at our mistakes and looks at our sins and then brings some kind of retribution. That's not the God that I believe in. But I wanted to bring this to you because when you think about that idea of the mikveh, you think about the halting of ritual. And right now, even my teaching you online and not necessarily around a table, which is what I'm so used to, it's not that it's just not normal. It's actually very difficult to process. And that's a little thing. That's a very little thing. Think about the ways and the rituals in which we're not gathering right now. We're not meeting for B'nai Mitzvah or Brit Milah. And I think this is a wake up call to all of us that when you think about that plague of blood, you have to remember that when life ceases for one person, or when life ceases for a county or a state or a country, when life ceases for a continent, we may not be able to see all of the people that are directly impacted by what's going on, but we have to remember that their hurt and their distress, it should impact us as well. And so I want us for just a moment to think about if we have those people in our lives whose rituals have been canceled or postponed, to realize that yes, this may be a special time. A lot of people are saying this, a special time to reconnect with each other, but it's also a time that's very hurtful for many, many people. And I'm not even speaking about the financial crisis of this world, but I'm speaking about the personal pieces where people are literally putting their lives on hold. And so if you are speaking to someone that's putting their life on hold right now, um, I'm hopeful that this talk will inspire you to call them and to reach out to them, to celebrate with you. And you deserve that celebration, and we'll celebrate together in a different way or as soon as we possibly can. So that's one commentary on Plague of Blood. What I also thought was fascinating is that we've actually been here before, the state of chaos. Well, I want you to listen to the verses of Breshit, and maybe you'll realize that this isn't so strange what we're experiencing right now. Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, v'haaretz haita tohu vavohu, choshech al penei tehom beruach Elohim merachefet al penei hamayim. When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void. A lot of people will say the earth being in this state of chaos with darkness over the surface of the earth. There was this vast void, this chaos that existed. But then God brought order back to the chaos and created this beautiful world that we live in. It's a pretty incredible idea to think about that even in an unraveling situation, unraveling of creation. So, in the same sense that God was able to separate the waters from the earth, think about that first plague, the plagues of blood and frogs dealing with water, dealing with the Nile. The Nile shall swarm with frogs, and they shall come up and enter your palace and your bedchamber and your bed. And so I want to read to you an interesting commentary by Professor Tzioni Zevet. And this is what he says about creation and that unraveling of the world that we know. At the end of the narrative in Exodus, Israel looks back over the stilled water of the sea at a land with no people, no animals, no vegetation, a land in which creation had been undone. Israel is convinced that its Redeemer is the Lord of all creation. It is this implicit theological principle that motivates the literary pattern. He who had just reduced order to chaos was the same as he who had previously ordered that which had once been unformed and void. Meaning, this is the same God that took chaos and made order, took order and made chaos, took chaos and made order. And it leads me to hope that the chaos that we're feeling right now must follow the same theological pattern. That as unraveled as the world may be at this moment, soon I pray that order will be restored. So moving on, I'm skipping a little bit ahead to beasts, okay? A lesson about beasts, the fourth plague. And I found also a really fascinating commentary. This is the Marbe Lesaper. This is Rabbi Yedidya Tia Weil, 1700s Prague. This is also his commentary on the Haggadah. And this is what he says about, we never study wild animals. You know, we sometimes put the masks on during our Seder. We have a good time singing the songs about the frogs, and everyone gets excited about the darkness, and we'll talk about darkness in a second, but no one ever speaks about the wild animals. And so I thought that deserved a little bit of attention. So here's his commentary. There was an animal that went up on the roof and bored a hole into the roof with its horn and gave birds of prey entrance. So basically, what's a better way of saying this? You were out of luck. There were wild animals and beasts everywhere. I can't help but think about my dad, who's watching. Thanks, Dad. Would make us watch scary movies when we were kids, and we would watch the birds. And it reminds me of that movie. Now we have to ask the question, why? I know. Thanks, Dad. He's laughing. Why the plague of beasts? And so back to Merechet Heidenheim. What he says, he asks the question, why did the Holy One cause the plague of wild beasts? And the answer, and I think it's a beautiful answer, or at least something for us to consider, because the Egyptians herded the Israelites like a herd. Listen to that again. Because the Egyptians herded the Israelites like a herd, so the Holy One sent birds of prey and the wild beasts in large herds to attack them. So what does that mean? The Egyptians treated the connection. And right now, I'm feeling this particular commentary very heavily, just in the sense that I think sometimes when we're looking at each other as if we are animals that might attack. I felt lucky because when I went to Ralph's the other day, people were still somewhat cordial and smiling, but I could see that we're scared of each other. And social distancing doesn't necessarily mean that we should be looking at each other like animals who are ready to attack. We should be taking care of each other by staying away. But when we see someone who's 6 feet away, or if we see someone online that we haven't talked to in a while, this is the time to reach out more than we ever have. We can't ever let someone else feel as if they are, literally dogs and cats on the ground. Nothing against your dogs and cats, by the way. I wanted to share another piece about the wild beasts, and that's from the Italian commentator Sforno. Schmoke continues to say that the wild beasts, they weren't just in people's homes, but they were also in the Sforno says is the following. A reference to the soil on which the houses stood which would become full of snakes and other creepers of the kind that inhabit the lower levels of the earth beneath its surface. The plague would result in the Egyptians feeling insecure in their homes, even when they had shut every exit tightly. Again, the Egyptians feeling insecure in their homes. I'm feeling a little insecure in my home. And I think we're all feeling a little insecure in our homes right now. And even when we feel, perhaps as the Egyptians did, that we are covering every exit and every window and every possibility for this virus to come in, that insecurity still remains. And I also bring this up because I worry about those of us who live with that kind of insecurity, meaning mental illness or depression. Um, I can only imagine the kind of anxiety that people are living with right now. And so when I say reach out to someone, um, I'm not just trying to preach it. I plan on living it. Reach out to someone that you know is feeling insecure at this moment and is feeling nervous and scared. And don't, if you don't mind me saying, um, please let them know that their fears are warranted. That this is a time to be afraid, but they're not alone in their fear. The Egyptians felt insecure, I think, because they felt like they were alone, experiencing the plague. We're experiencing this together. And so, if we're feeling insecure, even though we can't hold someone else's hand, hopefully they can feel the connection that we're placing out in the world. And so, moving on to the plague of darkness, here are the verses from Shemot. Stretch out your hand over the heavens and let there be darkness over the land of Egypt. They will feel the darkness. Listen to that word because the commentators love that word. They will feel the darkness. So Moshe stretched out his hands over the heavens, and there was a thick darkness throughout the land of Egypt. For 3 days, a man could not see his brother, and a man could not rise from his spot for 3 days. But for all the children of Israel, there was light in their settlements. So I couldn't help it. You know, I love Sforno, or at least I'm telling you that I love Sforno. And what Sforno says about the plague of darkness is not a substance that can be felt. It's merely the absence of light. That is why light has the ability to banish the darkness, was able to banish it. And I think the choice of words certainly sits with us tonight. But the darkness was thick. The darkness was suffocating. The darkness was something that you could feel. And I think right now it's something that we can feel as well. It's feeling a little bit like a dark time, something that we can't just turn on a light like a child and wish the darkness away. The darkness feels thick. And it's something that we wish we could move with our hands. Our son every morning is saying, well, what am I doing today? And where am I going tomorrow? And I think for parents, it's really, really difficult to give those answers. It's hard to say, well, we're not going anywhere tomorrow, or we're going to go on a walk, and we're going to see beautiful things. But to try to emerge from that darkness is very hard and very real. But it's more than that. Listen to this beautiful commentary. This is from the Evan HaEzel. This is Isser Zalman Meltzer, who is a famous Lithuanian rabbi and a posek. And this is what his commentary is about darkness. This is the verse, a man could not see his brother, and a man could not arise from his spot for 3 days. But he says that the greatest darkness is when a person does not see his fellow and does not participate in the distress of others. A man could not see his brother, and they did not feel the other's distress. Their senses were dulled. And that's what the sages meant. He said that people were more concerned about running after a golden dinar, running after money, and that would dull the person's eyes and make it difficult for him to feel the distress of others. Listen to that again, that the greatest darkness that one can experience is not being able to feel the distress of another human being. Ask yourself, do you feel the distress of someone else? Do you leave enough space in your heart right now, even with the anxiety and nerves that we hold? Do we have enough space to hold someone else's distress as well? Because if we're not able to make that kind of space, then it means that we're existing in darkness. And the way to bring light into our world is by recognizing another human being's pain. I want to see another piece for you. Okay. I hope you all have a chance. I don't know if Amazon's working in this way or not, or will be, but if you have a chance before Passover to get My People's Passover Haggadah, it's just filled with incredible commentary and information about the Haggadah itself. And I read a piece from David Arno, who speaks, who gives his own take on Exodus Rabbah on a piece of Midrash. And he says, in the dark, why darkness? God brought darkness upon the Egyptians for 3 days so that the Israelites, God smote transgressors in Israel who had Egyptian patrons and lived in affluence and honor and were unwilling to leave. Now, isn't that fascinating? Leaving Egypt is not always as appealing, he says, as it may seem. Another tradition holds that the Egyptians could actually see the Israelites. I had never thought about this or read this before, that in this plague of darkness, the Egyptians, they possibly couldn't see each other, but they could see the Israelites. And they would see the Israelites eating and drinking and rejoicing, and they would see and worry. For all who are in the dark, see those who are in the light. Listen to that. For all who are in the dark, see those who are in the light. I think a lot of us are saying right now, well, I'm okay. I'm not sick. Everything's fine in my home right now. I'm living this as much normalcy as possible. But imagine those who are watching you. Maybe those who are ill, or those who have less, or those who are worried. There are those who are in the dark watching those who are living in the light. And the way that we can be a true human being in this time of chaos and in this time of disarray is to think to ourselves, who's watching those who are in the light? Who exists in a perpetual state of darkness and is just watching and waiting and wondering when their darkness will subside? And with all of this being said, I still wanted to bring a few pieces of hope. Because, like I said, we've been here before. We existed in a state of chaos, and then there was the 7 days of creation. And then came the plagues, which we have read and learned tonight, theologically, unraveled and turned back into chaos. And yet, that chaos then turned back into order and beauty. And now it feels like we're a little bit in a place of disarray again. But then I saw this piece in Shemot Rabbah, and it says the following. God spoke all these words saying that God does all at once, kills and gives life at once, harms and heals. God hears the prayers of a woman on the birthing stool, sailors and desert walkers, and those bound in jail, one in the east and one in the west and one in the north and one in the south. God hears all these at once. So first of all, I just love the idea that God can hear all of us at once. And it continues. God forms light and creates darkness. Dust like so is turned to a person and returned to dust. What is it to the morning? Like its beginning in its beginning. And what does it say? And all the waters in the Nile were turned to blood and returned blood to water. Living flesh is turned to a corpse, and a corpse is returned to life. The staff is turned to a snake, and the snake is returned to staff. The sea is turned to dry land, and the dry land is returned to the sea. So what am I trying to say in bringing in this midrash? That everything goes back to normal. Now, what's normal? I don't exactly know what normal is going to be, but everything returns to the way it's supposed to return. It may be hard for us to wait for that moment, And it may be hard for us to realize that the returning is already taking place, but it will happen. It's happened before and it will happen again. Like I said, it may be a little different than what we're used to. The new beginning may not look like what yesterday was or the day before, but it will return. And then I just wanted to share one story with you. And maybe you've heard the story before, but I think it's always worth repeating. Rabbi Baruch's grandson, Yechiel, came running into his study in tears. Yechiel, Yechiel, why are you crying? Asked his grandfather. His sobbing grandfather explained, I was playing hide and seek with my friend and he stopped looking for me and left me alone. Rabbi Baruch caressed Yechiel's face, and with tears welling up in his eyes, he whispered softly, God too, Yechiel, God too is weeping, for he too has been hidden with no one looking for him. It's a beautiful story because what it means is that God feels as if God is hiding and everyone has stopped looking. And so in these moments when we think to ourselves, where's God? And why me? And why us? And why humanity? And why now? I think it means we have to look a little harder. Whether it is looking for God, those who are vulnerable, in before everyone else. You know, whether it's offering a smile to someone who's walking across the street and just needs that sense of human interaction. It's finding God in those moments in which it would be much easier to live in that plague of darkness. Don't forget that plague of darkness exists when we are unable to see the distress of another human being. We have the opportunity to bring God back into this world when we feel the pain of someone else and we let someone else um, really see where our heart is lying at this time. Connect now more than ever. We need it. We want it. We desire it. Um, and I think when we enact those points of connection, I will be speaking, teaching at 7:30. 8 o'clock's a little late for me, not gonna lie. 7:30 next week about how to cultivate a grateful spirit, no matter the time, no matter the situation, how to cultivate a grateful spirit. So I hope to see you next week at 7:30. But I also, and I you should all have the link. This is the YouTube site. Subscribe to the YouTube site, Sinai Presents. If you do that, then every time one of the rabbis or when the cantor teaches something, you'll get an immediate notification about one of our teachings. Let's see, tomorrow morning, Minyan at 7:30 in the morning. Oh, yep, 7:30 tomorrow morning. 5:45, we'll be having a special Kabbalat Shabbat service from Rabbi Sherman's and my home. Saturday morning, 9:30, a special tour in the round service in Cone Chapel. And again, please take a look at our YouTube site to make sure that you're keeping up to date with all of our classes and points of connection. I love being with all of you. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great night. This is the YouTube site. Subscribe to the morning 9:30, a special tour in the round service. Ooh.